Continuing my series of always long overdue Voltron reviews, let's talk about the most recent season of Voltron Legendary Defender. Again, this was more of a half season than its own thing, but at least this time it was sort of the end of a half season, and still started off in a pretty good place, so it didn't feel like it quite so much. There is a part of me that is very, very happy that they keep doing this, because, of course, Netflix series are known to release entire seasons all at once, but take a long time to produce them. This arrangement means that as long as they produce the first episodes in a season first, we can get a new season, aka a new half season, earlier than we would get the whole thing, which means more episodes more often, and I'm happy about that, but at the same time, probably because this is a Netflix show, it's a very serialized story, and has only been getting more serialized as the series progresses, with fewer and fewer detours from the main plot each season. Which means that when we only get a half season, we end up with a cliffhanger that wasn't written to be a cliffhanger. We end up getting a story that is split in half unceremoniously without anything being resolved. And like I said, this season was a little bit better because it was the half that resolved things, for the most part. Because obviously the story overall is still going, they can't resolve everything completely yet. But last season especially just left a really bad taste in my mouth because I felt like I was stuck on a cliffhanger that wasn't designed to be one. I'd like to see less of that. Now that they know that they're getting half seasons, going into the future I'd like to see more mid-season finales that are written to be proper cliffhangers and wrap up enough stuff before they conclude that we feel satisfied as an audience. This season in and of itself, though, really shook things up and played to my expectations. All last season we had Lotor out doing his own thing, scheming in the background against his father, but seemingly also against the Voltron Paladins as well. He had his own team of trusted allies and seemed to be building vehicles out of the same material that Voltron was built from. Vehicles which resemble parts of a body. I was left thinking that he was trying to build his own Voltron. And maybe that is what he was trying to do, but it's certainly not what ended up happening. Instead, the story went in a completely different direction, and Lotor's offer of allyship and friendship at the end of last season turned out to be genuine. Like, he was pushed into a corner and forced to kill one of his lieutenants. The others started to turn on him. He didn't really have much of a choice at that point. So logically, if his goal is to work against his father, forging an alliance with the Paladins would be the logical option at that point. But once he forges that alliance, he really comes off as trustworthy. It really does seem as if he is trying to bring his father down, and he is trying to reforge the Galra Empire into something less hostile, more peaceful, and more beneficial to the universe as a whole. And the reason that he seemed so malicious in his scheming last season was because, one, he was malicious, he was scheming against his father, who he hates, and two, because he was seen working against the Paladins. Because at that point, he didn't have any need to trust them yet, and so wasn't going to risk trusting them. But note, multiple times last season, when he probably could have killed them, he didn't. He didn't take that opportunity. And at the time, it just seemed like a stupid villain mistake. He was playing with them, toying with them, getting to know them better, forging a personal relationship with his enemy instead of just finishing them off. But now that genuinely doesn't seem to be what was happening. Now it genuinely does seem that while they were his enemies, they had made themselves his enemies by standing in his way multiple times, he was letting them go, he was going easy on them, so to speak, because he didn't actually want them to be his enemies and he didn't want them to die. Like, I think he derived pleasure from outsmarting and outmaneuvering them so many times, don't get me wrong. But now that they are his allies this season, this state of things seems to be what he prefers. He's even begun embracing his mixed heritage, because for those who don't know yet, he is half Galra and half Altean. And now that he's allied with the Paladins, he actually has access to real Alteans. Actual Altean history and actual Altean technology. He starts to learn about himself in ways that he never was able to before. Yes, he's cut off from his lieutenants and that does seem to bother him, but he seems to be actually enjoying his life more now. He even forges a really strong friendship with Allura that I found really charming, and while most of the season was spent with me wondering if he was going to betray the Paladins, I will not lie and tell you that the relationships that he was forging with, some of them at least, were not very interesting to me, and that I didn't become invested in them. And all of this is super interesting because in the original Voltron, Lotor was the worst. Like, he was such a bad guy, and I expected him to be some semblance of that in this, and they just took those expectations and tore him into little pieces. It really is great because it's so unexpected. The main plot of this season revolved around, first, them bringing down Lotor's father, Zarkon, who is at something resembling his original power level again. And, spoiler warning, they do. They defeat him, and the Galra Empire is thrown into chaos. And then the rest of the season is spent with Zarkon bidding for control of the Empire against a couple of other generals and Hagar. Though her bid is indirect, she has a proxy kind of working as the face of her group, so that he can dismantle the Empire peacefully and turn it into something more beneficial for the universe. And I see no reason for him to be so open and blatant about that if it weren't actually what he wanted to do. There is no benefit for him to lie about this, especially in public, especially in front of other Galra, if it's not what he actually wants to do. And probably the coolest part about all of this, aside from the fact that it leads to them uncovering old Altean stuff that I'm not going to get into because I would consider that too spoilery. Not to mention this scene here. Like, I'm not going to spoil anything, but people who have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. Is that there are actually Galra who choose to follow him. There are actually Galra who aren't that despicably evil. It was really cool. It was really cool to see and help to flesh out this universe more so than I ever expected it to be, and certainly more so than it ever was in the original version. There were other plots this season as well. Obviously, the plots of individual characters' families were furthered. We learned more about Keith's family. We learned more about what happened to Pidge's dad. Stuff like that was furthered, and some of it even resolved. But whereas last season, that was what I enjoyed the most about the season, here it was just a nice detour every once in a while. Here, the political intrigue, the stuff with Lotor, wondering whether or not he would betray the heroes, realizing more and more as the season progresses that I really hoped that he didn't. That was what I was invested in this season, and I honestly think this may be the best season of the show because of that, but that's a subjective thing. I'm not going to say that that's objectively true. It was just a really good season that gave me lots of the feels, and so I ended up taking away more from this season than I have some of the past ones. That's really all there is to it. And let me tell you, if Lotor does end up betraying them, I'm going to be devastated. And yes, I do think it could still happen, obviously. We've already seen that Lotor loses his cool when he's backed into a corner. And we also saw this season that when something didn't go the way he expected, even though he ended up being happy for the person that it happened for, again, too spoilery to go into details, he did get angry. He got over it, but he did get angry. When he is backed into a corner, when he's put into a situation and it goes a direction that he didn't expect, he can overreact. He can lash out. That is an aspect of his character, and it could come up again. It's even possible that his enemies could use that against him. But I don't think that's how it's going to go. I think if it does go that way, he'll end up recovering before he burns his bridges with the Paladins completely. I even kind of expect his lieutenants to rejoin him at some point and join Team Voltron, because honestly the situation they're in right now doesn't seem so great for them. But as much as this season played with my expectations, I'm not going to say for sure whether or not any of that's going to happen, because I could very well be wrong, and I don't like to be wrong. This was a really good, really solid season of this show. It may feel a little messy to someone watching it, especially if you only watch through it once, because a lot does happen this season and the status quo does shift often. But I still think it was one of the best written seasons of this show so far. It had good action, great political drama, great drama in general, and some of the best character interactions that this show has ever pulled off. If you are a Voltron fan and for some reason haven't watched this season yet, go do it. And if you're someone who feels like this new Voltron is just a polished up version of the original, I would recommend this season to you too, because I think it might change your opinion on things. This new Voltron is doing things very differently from the original at this point, and I think it's honestly for the best. But as per usual, guys, I'd like to know, what did you think of this season of Voltron Legendary Defender? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below or over on my Discord. Link in the description. Either way though, this has been AJ22 and I will talk to you guys later.